I guess now's as good a time as ever to ask why you've been sticking around, Sams.
Lord knows I want to hear a reason.
Are we so tapped for meaningful things to say and do that we have to rely on exposition from a guest? Guest isn't the word I'd use.
Yeah, guests are welcome.
Are you going to come over here and join the conversation in a way that's respectful, Moo?
Nah, carry on. I'll keep an ear out.
It's a waste, though, right? For what little we have here, it's rich and interesting, so...
And let me stop you right there. Because we are slaves to our own bias. That faith you're spouting is something people who aren't us either have to trust blindly, or dig beneath the things we show them to see the fruits themselves. And I'll remind you, we haven't really shown anyone anything. Or am I mistaken? No need to be a cock about it.
Where's Lucifer?
Probably on the desk. Why?
Because there's no rule saying we can't put each other's tools to work, and what I have to say needs visuals. At the end of the day, the conveying of information is our goal. The creation of that information comes first, and the provision of that information is the task all its own. Our available methods for our audience to achieve understanding are as follows. We provide the information ourselves, or they find it on their own. Hold on, I'm not sure I understand. We have to provide and present the information regardless, so what's the difference between us handing them information and them going looking for it?
The world. Let me try something different. This is a question of story versus lore, of primary material and secondary material. This one is the story we're trying to tell, and this one is the material that can enhance the story but is not necessary to the story's presentation, the understanding of the story, nor the enjoyment of the piece. Do you understand that much?
I understand the concept, I don't understand the point.
Of course, it needs to make sense to you. The information in this case is Sam's representing our body's pragmatism. I have presented this simple idea, our audience has interpreted that idea, and now that information belongs to them. Would you say that having this information is mandatory for our audience to have?
You can't discount entire ideas and concepts just because you don't think they're relevant.
Would you say that having this information is mandatory for our audience to have?
No?
But it deepens their understanding. It enhances their perception of me, and because of my prominence in this little story of ours,
don't flatter yourself.
It's information we should provide, and so we have. We have enhanced the story of the box in the middle of everything. And what's something we could call lore?
Death's involvement in all of this?
You have to look far back to find hints of that, and both of these snippets of information are in a proper place. But what you were trying to do was taboo, at least as far as I'm concerned. You prompted me to exposit about lore, and I responsibly twisted the answer into story. We should only ever present our audience with story. A creator can never require lore for the story to be understood, and should a curious fan dig deeper, they should only ever find lore. Am I clear?
Not even slightly.
I followed along, but maybe you need some less condescending visuals. Story is what we make of it. It is direct communication with our targets as opposed to laying information at their feet and telling them to browse it as it suits them. We will use the story of a man living a 9-to-5 life in a techno-fantasy setting, completely isolated from those fantastical elements. The story is in the characters. Him, his uptight floor manager, his dour booth neighbor, the optimistic water cooler guy who gets more jaded as the story goes on. The story is in the setting and the lack of intrigue we allow into it. It's in the themes of reclusion, entrapment, and the anxieties of pursuing wonder over security. The close encounter with the high-octane action his pencil pushing keeps away from him. The firing scare that forces him to toe a line between his urge for excitement and the need for sustainability. The realization that the work he does enables those living the life he dreams to live it more freely, more safely, and to greater success. All of those things are story. Backstory is story, especially if it's relevant to any permutation of themes, stakes, drama, motivations, or a character's arc. But information regarding the company's previous owners, or the happenings of what's beyond the company building would be, for the most part, irrelevant. Would that information enhance the world? Sure, but if it doesn't pertain to the plot, it can feel like fluff. If the previous boss rubbed off on the current boss's outlook and character, then that information is relevant.
If the outcome of a particular tech fantasy adventure influences or affects the plot, then that is something we can absolutely take the time to see. But that same adventure, without its influence on the story's focal point, quickly turns into padding. One of the simplest ways to appraise a scene as story, and an admittedly rudimentary and potentially flawed one, is determining whether or not it involves or influences the character, conflict, or resolution. If not, you can probably consider discounting it. But to a point, if the creator gives you something to consume, you have to assume in good faith that it's for a reason. And it's that reason that makes most information presented into story until proven otherwise. You're not making a very good objection. I guess not, huh? Okay, but the outside world is the eventual goal for the main character to reach, whether he decides to accept or reject it. We need to expose the readers to it so they can form their own opinion about the world we're keeping the main character from. But it's the main character's opinion that matters. And the practices of the company's previous bosses can help give insight into the professional culture of the world we created, and shine light on little nuances and practices that might seem mundane in the context of our story. But that requires us to remove ourselves from the text of our own story in the first place. That's the line between being relevant and pertaining to the relevant, story and lore. The world we make is a bubble, and the story we're telling inside it is a much smaller bubble. The stroke is where lore meets story and where things outside of the story can touch the story in a way that integrates that information. So, storytelling is a bubble-blowing competition where the readers are the judges. What? And showing up to the competition with multiple bubbles is bad sport. There's nothing in the rules per se, but it still feels slimy, reflects poorly on the creator, and distracts from the main submission. Are we seriously giving that a pass? The goal of storytelling is to present a whole, compelling, and well-crafted story. Lore is exclusively for the people who have already been compelled, and read-along YouTubers with hyperfixations. Huh. It's a Dunning-Kruger effect. That's not what the Dunning-Kruger effect entails. No, work with me. The three demographics of interest are not interested at all, interested in exploring, and hooked. The types of people who are receptive to lore are the people who don't give a shit and the implications don't mean anything to, and the people who have exposure and acceptance of the story and are interested in more. The third class is the only class who'd hear talk about the formation of a tech fantasy capital city and think, this doesn't sound very important. I hate to admit it, but that kind of makes sense. It falls in line with the golden rule, too. The creator can never acquire lore for their story, and the audience should never have to look for story, only lore. The consequences of crossing those lines are going to vary from reader to reader and writer to writer, and at the end of the day, creativity isn't a science. Everyone's experience is different. Everyone's perspectives on input and output are different. Everyone's styles and their values are different, and so long as story isn't marabatari in synthesis, or obviously insensitive or made in poor taste, the form the story takes on isn't something we're going to hold to scrutiny. But so long as the experience of consuming something is good, what does it really matter? The two of you are focusing too hard. It's making me worried that this whole being outnumbered thing is going to start growing teeth. Story and lore is a fine line to draw in the sand. It's a good distinction, really. It's one everyone who creates should know to make, and it's one that'll immediately improve anyone's art if they attempt to make it. But putting those two things together is only half the equation. I think consuming art is as much about enjoyment as it is enrichment, and if we're going to be so obsessed with pushing messages of efficient and focused storytelling, we need to make sure we also push that it's supposed to be fucking fun. Compelling weighs just as much as cool. Streamlined is just as important as exciting. The people who really love your story are going to go on and on about how rich the themes are, and compelling the conflict is, how enticing and nuanced your use of setting and characters are to tell your story about the ways both dreams and obligations can tear a person apart. But if you can't engage your audience through it, and make them enjoy the ride, then who gives a shit? It's why so many creatives put emphasis on the premises. Everyone enjoys different things in different ways, but if they don't enjoy something, they're not going to stick around to be enriched by it. But lots of people enjoy enrichment, and you can't be enriched by joy. There's no right way to balance those two pillars. There'd be 4 pillars, right? I was referring to the pillars I laid out, not yours. But unless you have a damn good reason for ignoring one, you'd be best off keeping them both in mind. Remember what each of them means to you and the way you make things. And make sure that at the end of the day, you're having fun.